Hello everyone, welcome back. Neighbor was stealing water from my supply, so I ruined him. I recently bought a new house in Asia. The previous owners, who were family friends, hadn't lived here for nearly 3 years and urgently needed cash, so I got the place for a fantastic price right in the middle of the capital city. The sale was finalized at the start of the month, and I moved in immediately. The house needed a lot of work, as the previous owners had left mid-renovation. In fact, the main door was just padlocked, not even secured with a proper door lock. Plus, there was no gate, meaning anyone could walk right in. On my first day, I found someone's bike parked in my garage. I moved it onto the street and had a gate installed that same day. Later, an angry man knocked on my gate, but I didn't answer. After 15 minutes, he took his bike and left. Already, I wasn't feeling great about the neighborhood. Aside from people assuming the place was still abandoned and blocking my gate, it was mostly uneventful. A no parking sign eventually solved that problem. Then, last week, I noticed something strange. While showering, I felt the water pressure drop significantly, and I could hear my neighbor's water pump running. My neighbor is an elderly man living on the first floor of a 3-story house. He rents out the other 2 floors to tenants. He had been upset about my house being sold and had even voiced his concerns to the previous owners. They'd warned me, but as a 6-foot guy with 3 dogs, I wasn't worried. In our area, water pumps are necessary to get water up to rooftop tanks since the public supply doesn't have enough pressure for multi-story buildings. Hearing his pump going while my pressure dropped made me suspicious, so I waited for his pump to shut off, then checked my taps. Sure enough, the pressure was back to normal. This raised more questions. The water bills for my new house had been unusually high over the years, despite no one living there. We'd assumed it was due to leaks, but the high cost didn't add up. It started to click. At some point, my neighbor must have started siphoning water from my lines. After a few days of mulling it over, I considered my options: confront him, go the legal route, or just let it be. Water in my country is cheap. My monthly bill is around $5, even with 3 pets, a weekly car wash, and garden watering. But it wasn't about the money. It was the principle. This entitled old man felt he could use someone else's water without consequences. I decided I wanted to teach him a lesson. Our next story is: the solution was simple. I turned off my water from the main valve. This didn't require me to touch his property or break any laws. When I heard his pump turn on, I just shut off my supply. Here's how it works. A ball valve in the rooftop tank detects water levels and triggers the pump. If no water flows in, the pump keeps running. My plan was to burn out his pump, causing him trouble with his tenants. What I hadn't accounted for was his outdated wiring. The constant power draw overloaded his 90s-era electrical system, causing power issues that escalated overnight. Around 3 a.m., I heard all the residents wake up, talking about why only their house had lost power and water. The tenants grew increasingly frustrated, and by morning, one even moved out. Our country has strict tenant protection laws, classifying water and power as essential services. If a landlord fails to provide these, tenants can file a complaint, which they did. The police fined him $500, a large sum here. Plus, he had to refund both tenants' security deposits and couldn't re-rent until the water and wiring were fixed, both costly repairs. Now, he's being forced to move in with his daughter because he lost his rental income and can't afford to live alone. As a retired mechanic, he has no other income. He eventually realized what had happened and confronted me, asking if I'd turned off my water. I kept it casual, saying, "Oh, yeah, I had a leak and turned it off until the plumber came." He just replied, "Oh, okay," and walked off. I'm not sure if he knows I know, but he can't do anything about it. I'll be hiring a plumber soon to rework my plumbing and remove any pipes that might connect outside my property. So with a simple twist of a tap, I managed to get rid of my water issue, and a neighbor who could have been a huge nuisance. 2 birds, 1 stone. TLDR. Bought a previously abandoned house. Neighbor was stealing water. I shut off my supply, which overloaded his pump and wiring, cutting off power and water. His tenants filed complaints, resulting in fines and loss of income. He now has to move in with family. Next episode: $175,000 credit card authorization? No problem, sir. This memory of some good old-fashioned malicious compliance came to mind from my days as a night auditor at a top hotel in a Midwestern U.S. city. For those who might not know, a night auditor usually handles front desk duties overnight, along with some basic bookkeeping and accounting. Our hotel had a policy: if a guest's charges exceeded their credit card authorization, we'd send a copy of their folio, basically, an itemized receipt, to their room, delivered discreetly under the door by our security staff. One night, we had a guest in from a major coastal city for business who had exceeded his card authorization, so per policy, we sent a folio to his room. Around 4:30 a.m., I got an irate call from this guest, demanding to know why we'd sent the folio to his room. I politely explained the hotel's policy, but he was furious and immediately snapped back, "Fine. Then authorize my credit card for $175,000. "Yes, sir. No problem, sir," I replied. So, I did exactly what he asked. The amount he didn't use would be refunded in 7 to 10 business days, which meant he had nearly $200,000 tied up on his card for the next 2 weeks. When I came in the following night, my supervisor was waiting and asked why I authorized such a high amount. My answer was simple: because he asked for it. TL. Doctor. Angry hotel guest demanded a $175,000 hold on his card, so I complied. Our next story is: if you're gonna steal my catalytic converters, check if they're functional first. Last week started with a bang, literally. At 2:45 a.m., I fired up my truck, waking everyone up, only to discover that someone had swiped my catalytic converters. The joke's on them though, because they were hollowed out and non-functional. Turns out, the culprits missed the neighbor's cameras, which caught everything. 2 local kids in a beat-up, old police Crown Vic were behind it. Instead of calling the cops, I contacted a friend who works in code enforcement. I told him my plan, and he relayed it to the police. I was finally going to do a nuisance tow on their Crown Vic. Their car wasn't even close to street legal. No plates, no insurance, busted taillights, and it rattled from a cheap sound system. I'd seen it parked on a quiet street, so I called it in, got the go-ahead, and towed it straight to the police station. The VIN check revealed it hadn't been registered since 2011, and the original owner wasn't these kids. It had been sold to them without a title due to the pileup of back registration fees. The police decided to junk it until they could issue a black title, certificate of destruction. Meanwhile, the kids thought a friend had taken it as a prank. They tracked it down at the junkyard and tried to steal it back. One distracted the yard owner while the other tried to make off with the car. But the junkyard staff was prepared, having removed the drive shaft beforehand. They were arrested for the attempted theft, and I missed the best part: the junkyard crane tearing their car apart, reducing it to a bare frame. They're out of jail now, lying low in their trailer. When I drove by, I spotted a beat-up Jeep Liberty in their driveway, also with no plates. I'm already coordinating with the cops to seize that one if it ever shows up in public, and I'm definitely not missing the show next time. TL. Doctor. Thieves stole my non-functional catalytic converters. I had their street illegal car towed, which ended up at a junkyard and got destroyed after they tried to steal it back. Next episode: tricking my slacker coworker into sabotaging himself. I work with a guy. Let's call him Seth. Seth is that coworker everyone dreads. Lazy, constantly passing his work off onto others, and somehow always avoiding consequences. He spends most of his time on his phone or taking bathroom breaks every 10 minutes. He shows up late with traffic excuses, then disappears for extended lunches. For the past 6 months, Seth's favorite target has been me. He'd send emails asking if I could help with projects, which really meant do all the work while I take the credit. I tried complaining to my boss, but Seth always managed to slip out of trouble. The final straw came when he dumped a major report due to a client on me with only 2 days left. I knew I had to do something. So, one day, I casually asked Seth if he was good with Excel. He admitted he didn't know much about it. Perfect. The next time he dumped a spreadsheet project on me, I agreed to help, but this time, I embedded a series of hidden formulas in the document. These formulas didn't do anything drastic, just enough to scramble the numbers if someone didn't know how to spot hidden cells. I made sure it wouldn't be too obvious, so every time Seth tried to copy and paste the data, it would distort just enough to be useless. When the report was due, Seth was his usual lazy self, assuming I had covered it. When the client called, furious about a report full of nonsense numbers, Seth panicked. He scrambled to fix it, but every time he corrected one part, something else would break. He came to me, desperate for help. I just shrugged and said, maybe it's a glitch, and gave him vague suggestions while watching him struggle. Eventually, our boss found out. This time, Seth couldn't talk his way out of it. He got chewed out for botching such an important report and was put on temporary leave without pay. I'm pretty sure he'll be handling his own projects from now on. TL. Doctor. Lazy coworker kept dumping work on me, so I tricked him with hidden Excel formulas that scrambled his report. He messed up in front of a client, got chewed out by the boss, and was put on unpaid leave. Our next story is: best of Redditor updates. Landlord is claiming I used illicit drugs in my apartment, charging me over $6,000. Location: Idaho. I haven't been able to find much info about the legality of this situation or anything related to it online. It seems like a new practice with little regulation. Sorry for the long post, but I am truly at a loss here. I moved out of my apartment on June 30th after 2 years. Yesterday, I checked my resident portal and saw that they charged me over $5,000 for meth remediation, along with about $1,500 in other charges related to remediation, painting, carpet, etc. I was shocked, considering I never used drugs in the apartment. I drove to the complex to speak to the on-site manager, who told me that during the final walkthrough, which I had requested to be part of but wasn't contacted about, they're not legally required to include me. There was suspicion of drug use. However, my final notice document has a section titled Images for Charges, but no images were attached. They performed a contamination test, which supposedly came back positive, so they hired a company to remediate my unit only. Allegedly, she couldn't provide any documentation. Other possibly notable info. About a month before I moved out, the tenants below me were arrested and charged with meth trafficking. They had, interesting, visitors at all hours, and I suspect they were using drugs in their apartment based on behaviors I observed. The charges were added to my account on July 18th, and immediately written off and transferred to a collection agency the same day. They haven't told me which agency, and no one has contacted me, but I assume someone will eventually. I asked the manager to provide me with the results of the contamination test done before I moved in, and she admitted there wasn't one. I don't believe they've ever tested the unit before now. From reputable sources, US and Australian government websites, I found that meth residue can stay on surfaces for at least 5 years, possibly longer, as that's the longest study conducted so far. I haven't received any communication from them since 6/1, just a receipt for rent. I've never had issues with them, though they overcharged me for rent twice and refused refunds, saying their system couldn't process them. They also forgot to sign my new lease until weeks after I signed, and I only found out when the manager yelled at me for asking why I was charged a month-to-month fee. I have screenshots of sections of the lease I think are relevant if anyone is interested. I've reached out to the Idaho State Bar for a referral to a tenant lawyer because the tenant/landlord lawyers I found online don't take tenant cases. Would it be better to pay the fees in full and then sue the owner for damages? I don't want this to affect my credit or future rental prospects. Thank you for any advice you can provide. Update 8/2, 10:25 a.m. I just received an email from the property management stating the collection agency is charging me daily interest and that if I pay them in full immediately, they'll remove the interest fees accrued from 7/18. She also provided the collection agency's name, which I wasn't given until now. I'll call them and let them know I'm disputing the charges. Update 8/2, 12:46 p.m. I emailed property management requesting the following. Photos and notes from the final walkthrough documenting any issue warranting a contamination test. Contamination test results from my unit, both before and after my occupancy, and the one for the unit below mine. Invoices from the companies that performed the meth remediation and contamination test. Notes from my pre-move-out walkthrough on June 3, 2024. Property management claimed they aren't required to provide any of this since the collection agency now handles the debt. They added the charges on July 18, then immediately transferred them to collections, possibly to prevent me from obtaining documentation. I called the collection agency. They said they have no record of my account. Property management is still refusing to provide documents. Update. It's been almost 3 months since I posted here, and I wanted to update everyone, as the advice given here truly saved me. Thank you all so much. The property management company is a large one, managing thousands of units across states. They should know better. I didn't pay the fees to sue, as many advised against it. Thanks for that. I emailed the property management company on August 2 with my document request. As of today, I haven't received anything. They never sent my account to collections. They lied, hoping I'd pay up immediately. Following one commenter's suggestion, I submitted an open records request to my city's police department. Having this from my attorney was invaluable. Thank you. Final outcome. I reached out to the Idaho State Bar for lawyer referrals but found that most didn't take tenant cases. After contacting over 40 attorneys, I found 3 willing to help, though 2 wanted flat fees of $1,200 to $1,500 for brief consultation calls. 3 days before the charges were set to be actually sent to collections, I found an attorney who, although not specializing in landlord/tenant cases, agreed to hear my situation. She met with me for 3 hours on a Sunday and reviewed everything I'd compiled. She sent a demand letter the next day, referencing my documents. The final sentence read, "If you want to contact the person who owes this money, here's their contact info at the jail, because it's certainly not my client's responsibility." The letter also demanded they refund about 2/3 of my deposit and prevented them from sending me to collections. A week later, I received a call from my attorney confirming that the company had removed all charges from my account and would send my refund check within 10 days, which they did. She charged me a $300 flat fee, even though her normal rate is $700 per hour. Thank you all so much for your advice. As someone in my early 20s with an anxiety disorder and a mood disorder, this situation was overwhelming. Your comments encouraged me to keep fighting for an attorney who would truly help. I wish you all the best. Our next story is Story from Traumatize Them Back. Title: I just witnessed a massacre. Earlier this evening, in a supermarket aisle, I saw a scene unfold that I'll never forget. A 20-something man, carrying a baby in a sling, was trying to shop in peace when an older woman approached him. Making eye contact with him, and then with me, she loudly declared, "I love to see a man doing the babysitting. Are you giving his mom a break?" He replied, calmly, "I am her mom. I just haven't had a chance to look after myself much with a newborn." The woman's face froze as she realized her mistake. She stammered an apology and quickly backed away around the corner. Then, with a smirk, he turned to me and said, "I'm her dad, really. I just don't like it when they call it babysitting." It was legendary, perhaps the greatest thing I've ever witnessed in real life. I laughed so hard, especially when I rounded the corner and saw she had dumped her trolley and left the store in embarrassment. To the dads out there, next time someone calls looking after your child babysitting, try his approach. They might think twice next time. Edit: Wow, this post blew up, and it's attracted some nasty behavior. I don't understand it. Who gets pleasure from reporting me to Reddit cares? Get a hobby. Go for a jog or something. Since this unexpectedly took off, I thought I'd clarify a few things. 1. The woman was in her mid-50s, so Gen X, not a boomer. I'm 48, also Gen X. Age shouldn't be an excuse. Times change, and so should we. 2. Her words might seem friendly in text, but her tone was condescending. She basically invited me to marvel at a man taking care of a child. She was, in a way, bullying him for doing what every parent does. 3. This isn't just about words, it's about what those words represent. When we call mothers the default caregivers and refer to dads as helping or babysitting, we undermine the role of fathers. It leaves moms overwhelmed and ignores the reality of single dads, gay dads, or families with no traditional mom role. What if there's no mom at all? Or if she's unable to care for the child? 4. This situation could have been avoided if she'd just remembered what we all learned as kids: don't talk to strangers. That man was just trying to buy crackers and chat with his baby daughter. He didn't want to be the center of attention. 5. I don't have kids myself, though I'm an occasional foster carer and an enthusiastic aunt, but I do know what an appropriate social interaction looks like. Final edit. Before I take a break from Reddit, I want to share a few things I learned today. 1. There's something called the Eternity Club for posts that reach the front page. I might hang out there and start a support group for those traumatized by Reddit Cares notifications. 2. I'm fine with differing views and being roasted, if it's done well, and I don't mind if some people don't believe my story. But using a tool like Reddit Cares to tell someone to harm themselves? That's unhinged behavior. 3. It's become clear that this post went viral partly because people were drawn in by the word massacre, and when they didn't get literal death, some of them told me to die instead. That's dark. 4. Finally, while I appreciate the awards, don't waste your money on Reddit. Give it to a food bank, or spend it on something fun for yourself. But hey, if giving money to a billionaire is your thing, no judgment. Our next story is: Woman told me I was a terrible daughter for not calling my mom on Mother's Day, so I told her why. For a few years, I worked at a dispensary and loved almost all of my customers. Of course, not everyone was great, and there was one woman, Rachel, who always got under my skin. For context, my mother passed away when I was 19 and she was just 46. She was my best friend, and even nearly 10 years later, I still miss her every single day. Holidays, especially, are really hard for me and my family. There are 3 days each year that I always try to take off work: Mother's Day, her birthday, and Christmas. But last Mother's Day, I couldn't take the day off because there were only 2 people working at our store, and my manager wanted to spend it with her mom. I, of course, let her. So, on that day, Rachel and her partner came in, and she asked if I'd called my mom yet. I simply said no, hoping to leave it at that, but she wouldn't let it go. She went on about how terrible of a daughter I must be for not calling and how my mom must be so disappointed in me. I tried my best to hold back tears. I'm not confrontational, and standing up for myself is hard for me, but after a few minutes of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I looked her dead in the face, more serious than I'd ever been, and said, "I'd love to call my mom, but she's dead." The color drained from her face, and both she and her partner quickly made their purchase and left without another word. I never saw them again. Our next story is: Nurse said I was squeamish because I hadn't had children yet. I traumatized her by telling her about the illegal medical testing I endured as a child. Edit: I mistakenly used female pronouns for the male nurse in the title. In my native language, the word for nurse is categorized as female, which is why I wrote her instead of him. I've also been told this person was likely a phlebotomist and not a nurse. Apologies for the confusion. This happened a couple of weeks ago. My fertility doctor ordered blood tests for me. I'm 34, so I went to my local healthcare clinic to get them done. I have trypanophobia, fear of needles, which I always disclose to the person drawing my blood. I warn them because I can handle a short draw, but if it takes too long, I'm likely to faint or vomit. I've even thrown up on a nurse's shoes before. It's embarrassing. The nurse looks at me skeptically and asks if I have children. I say no. The blood test labels, which include the word infertility in bold letters, were a dead giveaway. The nurse continues, suggesting that I won't be so squeamish once I have kids. I'm already starting to feel faint, and I'm pretty pissed off, so I respond coldly, I didn't used to be squeamish about needles when I was a kid. That's why doctors in my home country volunteered me for medical testing and training. My parents got paid while I was used as a human pincushion for medical trainees. I specifically remember the day they taught students how to draw blood from my neck. The nurse went pale and immediately started drawing my blood in silence. Unfortunately, because of how long it took, I ended up throwing up, which they had to clean up. Maybe next time they'll listen to their patient instead of assuming things. Edit 1. A lot of people suggested I ask for an emesis bag. I actually had one with me, which I used. It's just that the volume of my reaction can be hard to control, and it's always super embarrassing. For others with similar issues, I also bring ice packs and ice water, which help a lot. Edit 2. Some people are confused by the infertility label. I was a little confused at the time too, but it's with Kaiser Permanente, and their clinic just happens to use infertility in the name, so it's a shorthand for where to send the tests. Edit 3. To clarify, I wasn't offended by the nurse's comments because of my infertility. What bothered me was the offensive, misogynistic assumption that my fear of needles somehow relates to whether or not I've given birth. Edit 4. I think I need to stop editing at this point, haha. But to clarify, the nurse specifically mentioned childbirth, which is why I called it misogynistic. Childbirth doesn't cure trypanophobia. Being squeamish about needles is a medical condition, not something related to motherhood. I would clean up vomit and poop every day for the rest of my life if it meant I could avoid another needle. Next episode, Karen said boys will be boys, so I returned the favor. More than 20 years ago, when my sisters and I were still in elementary school, our mom took us to a shopping mall for clothes and groceries. Afterward, we stopped by the bookstore, where we were free to pick out whatever books we wanted, while mom chose educational books for us. The bookstore also had a section selling software disks, including games. As my sister and I were looking at the games, a boy around our age came up to us, opened one of the discs, and poked my sister in the eye. She immediately started crying, and our mom rushed over to see what happened. After hearing the situation, she scolded the boy, who then ran off to grab his mother. Enter Karen. She marched over, demanding to know who yelled at her precious son. A heated argument between the two women followed. My mom explained that there was no reason for her son to hurt my sister, and that he should be taught better. But Karen wasn't having it. She dismissed the whole thing with a smug boys will be boys and asked why my mom was overreacting. At this point, I'd had enough. I took a few steps back, then kicked the boy right in the chest as hard as I could, knocking him onto his butt. The imprint of my shoe was clearly visible on his shirt. He let out the most obnoxious cry, which only made things worse. Karen rushed over, screaming at me, but I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Boys will be boys. Why are you overreacting?" She tried to argue further, but her friend, or sister, held her back and ushered her out of the store. We ended the day with burgers and fries, but my mom lectured me on how violence isn't the answer. As a sprightly elementary school kid, I didn't care. I was on a hype train for weeks after that. Our next story is, my friend is dying, Karen. I just stumbled across this sub and felt like sharing an incident that still makes my blood boil. Back in high school, my friend group included this guy who had a terminal illness. His doctors were shocked he was still alive. Aside from being a bit skinny and pale, he looked like any other teenager. He had good days and bad days, but even on his good days, he would tire easily. He didn't talk much about his illness and tried to live as normally as possible. He'd talk about the college he wanted to attend, the career he dreamed of, just like any of us. We respected that and never brought up his illness. We had a placard so we could always park in handicapped spots. We often got dirty looks when a bunch of seemingly healthy teens got out of the car, but we ignored it because our friend didn't let it bother him, so we didn't say anything. One weekend, we decided to hit the amusement park. After an hour or so, our friend started getting tired, so we rented one of those loaner wheelchairs. Like the teenagers we were, we took turns pushing him really fast, doing wheelies, and just trying to have fun without bothering anyone else. He was laughing his ass off. That is, until a Karen shouted at us from across the way, "You know you're keeping that wheelchair from someone who actually needs it, don't you?" I looked at my friend, and his smile instantly disappeared. That was it for me. I was done. I marched over to her, knowing exactly what I was going to say, after biting my tongue for so long. I didn't raise my voice so my friend wouldn't overhear. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm sure you'll be happy to know my friend has a terminal illness, and his doctors say he could die any moment now, so someone else will get to use that wheelchair very soon." She turned bright red. "Well, how was I supposed to know that?" she snapped. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You weren't, because it's none of your effing business. So thank you for reminding my friend he's dying when he was finally having some fun." I turned around and walked back to my friends. He made it another 2 years after that. Jay, I still miss you, bro. Our next story is... Oops! I think I broke him. Let me set the scene. I, 31F, am visiting my boomer father from out of state, sitting around the dinner table with the rest of my family. My parents divorced when I was 13 or 14, and both have remarried, but my father can't seem to move on. He still constantly trashes my mom, even to this day. Recently, he developed this weird sense of accomplishment, bragging that he raised kids to be insecure because, in his mind, the only way to teach someone to think of others is by guilting them into doing so. So, he's sitting there boasting about his parenting successes, and I flatly reply, except that it turned me into a doormat. I sought the approval of others so badly that I let people use me, especially as a teenager. He sees this as an opportunity to trash my mom, and says, "Yeah, your brother told me you used to sneak boys over to your mom's at night. That would have never happened if I'd gotten sole custody of you instead of your mom." My response? Actually, it probably would have happened a lot more. In fact, the first time it happened was here. The look on his face was priceless. He was so dumbfounded he could barely speak and stammered, "What?" I calmly explain, "Yeah, I used to take the screen out of my window and have them climb through it." His jaw literally dropped. Then I delivered the final blow. "Oh, and by the way, I was 15 the first time. He was 20, so a man, not a boy. That tends to happen when you're so insecure that you'll do anything for approval." At that point, his brain basically shut down. He had no idea how to respond, so he just completely changed the subject, which was way more awkward than if he'd actually tried to defend himself. If you ask him about that conversation now, I'm sure he's wiped it from his memory. His small mind can't process it, so I'm not surprised when he acts like it never happened. He still brags about raising kids to be insecure, but honestly, the lasting image of his shock, that's all I need. Our next story is... Didn't look pretty enough 4 hours after my mom died? This happened a long time ago, but I still wonder sometimes what the guy who said this to me thought, or if he ever learned from it. My mom had been terminal and was in hospice care at home. We knew her time was limited, and I hadn't been sleeping much, averaging only a couple of hours per night in the weeks leading up to her passing. Then, she passed away just before 4 in the morning. Afterward, I decided I needed caffeine to get through the day, so when the gas station near me opened at 8 a.m., I drove over to grab some energy drinks. I was exhausted, wearing oversized college merch, and I knew I probably didn't look my best. I could feel the dark circles under my eyes and the exhaustion from the lack of sleep, but I was just trying to get what I needed and get back home. As I was getting out of my car, trying to find my wallet in my giant pockets, a man in a very shiny car pulls up. I don't remember his face, but he looked like a polished, well-put-together game show host type. From about 20 feet away, he says loudly, "It's a shame someone so pretty can't improve everyone's day with a smile." In that moment, I just lost it. I started sobbing uncontrollably. Ugly, crying, shaking, the whole thing. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just screamed out, "I'm sorry I'm not fucking pretty enough for you when my mom died 4 hours ago." Without saying a word, the guy turned and walked back to his car. Didn't pump gas, didn't go inside for coffee, just left. He didn't apologize, he didn't even stop to consider what I had said. I was left standing in the parking lot sobbing, but thankfully, a woman jogging by overheard the exchange and stopped to check on me. The gas station employee was also incredibly kind and offered me comfort. Edit. Some people are confused, thinking that being called pretty was a compliment. But I didn't look great. I was wearing a hoodie that went past my knees and sweatpants stuffed into duck boots. My dark circles were so bad that a few days later someone asked if a snowball hit me in the face. They thought I had 2 black eyes. My hair was piled on top of my head, and I hadn't brushed it. I also get red blotches on my face when I cry or when I'm cold. It was January, so my face was blotchy even before the crying. The best case scenario? He was trying to compliment me, awkwardly, in a sandwich critique way. Worst case? He was being passive-aggressive about how I looked. I don't think he intended to make a stranger cry. I just think he made a terribly awkward comment he shouldn't have. But it was still a painful reminder that telling women to smile is never okay. Our next story is: Boss says my chemo treatment isn't as bad as all that. I put the evidence in her hand. A few years ago, I had to undergo chemotherapy. I was warned about the usual side effects: nausea, fatigue, aches, pains, and of course, hair loss. After the first couple of rounds, I was feeling surprisingly good. I didn't have much nausea, which was a relief since that had been my biggest fear. But then, I started noticing things. My gums were sore. My hair was thinning. It wasn't bad at first, just a little more on the comb, a little more in the shower drain. But I knew what was happening. A couple of rounds later, I was feeling rough. Mouth ulcers, zero appetite, and the familiar ache of chemo creeping through my body. Still, my hair was hanging on, barely. I worked in a small office with Carla, my boss. She was in her 40s, self-involved, and loved talking about how tough her life was. Most of her complaints were just regular problems that everyone deals with, but to her, they were insufferable situations. She always managed to bring everything back to how it made her feel. When I told her I'd be undergoing chemo, she seemed sympathetic at first. I'd take 3 days off every couple of weeks for treatment and be back to work the rest of the time. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. Then her attitude started to change. Odd passive-aggressive comments about my treatment cropped up. Eventually, her friend pulled me aside and told me that Carla was really struggling to come to terms with my diagnosis. I was baffled. I was the one with cancer, not her, but I let it slide, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. But as the days went on, her behavior became more bizarre. Was she jealous? Was she trying to compete with my cancer for attention? I couldn't shake the thought. Then, one day, it all came to a head. I was at my desk feeling rough. Recent chemo left me gray and weak. A colleague asked if I was okay, and I joked, "I won't have much hair this time next week." Carla, overhearing, snapped, "Oh, come on. I don't think chemo's as bad as all that, is it?" If this had come from a friend, maybe I would have laughed it off. But this was my boss, and something inside me snapped. I stood up, walked over to her, and without a word, reached up and yanked a giant fistful of hair from the back of my head. I held the hair in my hand, looking at Carla. "What do you think, Carla?" I asked, placing it in her hand before turning and walking out of the office. The silence in the room was deafening. I went out for an early lunch to calm down, and when I returned, HR was waiting for me. They'd heard about the incident, and the HR rep offered me paid leave for the remainder of my treatment. I accepted, took my leave, and went home. That evening, I celebrated with my girlfriend and friends. We cracked open some beers, ordered curry, and shaved my head. It was oddly satisfying. As for Carla, her behavior caught up with her. Word spread about her callousness, and people started calling her hairball behind her back. She tried to explain herself, but the damage was done. I returned to work a few weeks later, only to hand in my resignation. I left with a bit of class, wishing Carla the best, and gave her a gift, a DVD of Hair, the 1979 anti-war musical. My hair eventually grew back. I returned to my usual routine of mild male pattern baldness paranoia. And even now, I still crave an ice-cold, wafer-thin BLT. Our next story is: we have here stories that are perfect examples of how unexpected, awkward, and sometimes hilarious interactions with law enforcement can be. I was getting tampons, officer. One night, I got pulled over on my way home from Walmart. I knew I deserved the ticket. I was speeding, but the cop was asking way too many personal questions. It was late, I was cramping, and all I wanted to do was get home, stop bleeding in my pants, and eat my cookies. Of course, the first question: "Do you know how fast you were going?" Big sigh. "Yes, sir. 65. Where are you coming from?" "Okay, fair question. It was 12 a.m. Walmart, officer." "What were you getting at Walmart?" "Wait, what? Why does that even matter? I just want to get home." "But since you asked," I responded, "I was getting tampons. Do you want to see them?" His eyes went wide, and without saying a word, he walked away. When he came back to give me the ticket, he couldn't even make eye contact. That was, without a doubt, the most expensive box of tampons I've ever bought. But honestly, the look on that officer's face was totally priceless. Down the comments, we got similar stories. One commenter shared, "Got pulled over on a back road for swerving. The officer came to my window and asked if I had been drinking because he saw me swerving onto the side of the road. I looked at him and said, 'You were tailgating me, sir. I thought you were trying to get around me.' 100% laughed it off and didn't give me a ticket. Still pissed he tailgated like that." Another one chimed in, The first time I was ever pulled over was probably that cop story of the month. I pulled out from an intersection after dropping my boyfriend off. Between loose gravel, thanks, poorly maintained road, and my inexperience driving a stick shift, my tires squealed. I was pulled over in front of my small town's library at like 10 p.m., crying. The officer walked up, saw what he was dealing with, laughed, and said, "Still getting used to it, huh? He just told me to be safe and take care." I was 16 and mortified because what if one of my grandma's coffee friends, or their husbands, or their dog's groomer's first cousin once removed saw me and told her I got in trouble? Of course, it was all fine, and everyone laughed when I eventually shared the story. Our next story is, don't do it. This afternoon, I was shopping at a store I don't usually frequent. I was browsing the vitamin section, trying to make sense of their disorganized shelves when suddenly, someone reached around and grabbed my left boob, hard. I spun around, and in one swift motion, I slammed the heel of my right hand into the nearest nose. The young man, probably about 14 years old, stumbled backward and crashed into the shelves behind him. A burst of laughter erupted from a group of 3 teens a few feet down the aisle. One of the biggest ones was holding a phone, pointing it in my direction, no doubt recording the whole thing. I moved quicker than he expected, grabbed the phone out of his hands, and started hustling toward the front of the store. As he lunged to try and snatch it back, yelling all sorts of things, an employee intervened. Turns out loss prevention had been watching everything unfold on the cameras. While the phone's owner was busy talking to the employees, I used the opportunity to check the contacts on the phone and called my mom. I explained what had happened and then waited for the police to arrive, handing the phone over to them when they got there. Mom was less than thrilled when I explained the situation. I guess neither of us were exactly happy about it. The 14-year-old and the phone's owner were arrested. The other 2 teens, who had been laughing, took off. As the police were escorting the kids to the car, they asked if they had anything to say to me. Of course, they didn't. "I have something to say," I said. "Don't mess with a Marine. Tomorrow's my 67th birthday, and honestly, I have no idea what made them think I'd be an easy target. And no, I've never been a Marine. But maybe next time, they'll think twice before messing with someone who isn't afraid to stand up for herself." Update. You all convinced me. I'll be calling the police station tomorrow to let them know I'm getting a lawyer. I plan on asking if they want to take pictures, or if my own will do. I've already taken some photos. There's a clear handprint on my chest. I'm ghost pale, so the purple marks show up really well. By Monday, it should be very vivid. That's it for now. See you in the next post.